So I'm out here in Shenandoah area in Virginia, and I've been driving around, and yesterday I came across this resort, this mountaintop resort that had a mountain lake. It was actually called Mountain Lake Resort. The problem was that this lake was completely dried up. Actually, not completely, well, as we'll see. I started hiking into this dried up lake bed, and I started to realize that this was actually a really interesting and unique ecological feature that I had never seen before. It had what I can only describe as ecological tree rings, which I'm going to explain as we kind of go through the footage here. Let's take a look. The first thing I noticed when walking into this place was they had this little pier that went out. Presumably, it used to be going out over the water. What I noticed was that around this pier, there was like trees, young trees sprouting up. This area had clearly not been underwater for quite some time. I was trying to estimate, how old are these trees? Because that tells us something about how long it's been since this area was underwater. And I estimated those trees must have been at minimum 10 years old. So this was really the first mind-blowing thing I saw. As I started to hike in, the vegetation that was present there is like changing really rapidly. This is more rapid than an ecotone, which I covered in a previous video. Ecotone is like a gradient in the ecosystem in the plants that are present across space, and it's usually over a wide, much larger area that's caused by variation in like the environmental conditions. For example, going up in elevation, there'll be ecotones. No, this was happening over a much smaller scale. The first tree ring was occupied by young saplings and just young trees, even some bushes and some pine trees. Then, as you go further, it kind of transitions into this region of just like some bushes, like these shrubs. And then it goes to these grasses. As you go in further, the grasses start to thin out. It becomes a little less dense. And eventually I got to the bottom of the lake where, to my absolute delight, there was still a little bit of water left, and there were some cute little salamanders hanging out in what water there was left at the bottom. I'm actually at the grave of Stonewall Jackson right back there, if you can see that, in alignment with the Halloween season that we're in right now. Again, what was so interesting about this was how rapidly the environment was changing as we went in. And there were three key aspects of the vegetation that I noticed was changing as we went to deeper levels of the lake. The first thing was that the dominant type of plant in that area changed. It started off with the trees, and then it went to the grasses, and then even lower lying plants that were just growing on the mud surface. The second aspect that was changing was the density, or the overall amount of biomass. That was decreasing as we went in. And the third aspect that was changing was the biodiversity at each layer. At the first ring, there was a lot more different types of trees and plants, and then it kind of became more just dominated by a single species. I think the word's monocultural, but I'm not sure. If somebody knows, you can tell me. That was interesting. I found some interesting things in there, like at some point, they had put in a second little pier, like in the middle layer of the lake. There was even a stranded paddle boat just hanging out there in the grasses. So that tells you a little something about the history of this place. What I found so fascinating about this place and why I'm making this video is that this was a rare instance where you could actually see the history of the place by looking at its current state. Kind of like looking at tree rings, you can see all the years that it's been through. This place was so fascinating because the water level had receded at a sufficiently slow rate that it kind of matched the rate at which the new plants could come in and colonize the newly exposed areas. And so what you're left with is this place that was it was such a vivid picture where you could read the history of the place by looking at the change across space. And you're effectively walking back in time as you go inward into the lake. The center of the lake, where it was just the mud, represents like the past. And then as you're coming out, you're walking up to the present and you're seeing the transformation of that ecosystem as you walk across space. And I thought that was just really, really cool to witness. I'm assuming this is due to like global warming. Over time it evaporated, and there's probably a lot more of these type of dried out mountain lakes. Just thought that was a cool little thing that I found, and I frantically started to record it and check as soon as I realized, like, oh my god, this has to be shown. And really, honestly, the real reason is just because it's such a cool looking place. Like the plants there, I found some lichens that I had never seen before. All right, that's all I wanted to share. See you next time. Peace out.